behalf of team owner and manager Bob Forbes and Mark Gibbs, the lead driver in the car, and indeed its victory, another Nissan victory at Sandown.
My name is Alan Heaphy. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the building and development of the Nissan GT-R R32 with Gibson Motorsport, where we built 5 cars over a period of 4 years, and the GIO car was one of those special cars that we built in that time. The Group A category as such was devised in about 1985, thereabouts. I think it was close to that year. And it was an international formula. So it was something that the FIA had set up as a set of rules to include manufacturers on a world basis to get involved in touring car racing. So the manufacturer had to build 750, minimum 750 of a specific car model. Then from that they were able to homologate the car to go into Group A racing.
The road. Fastest split time so far, no surprises there. It's a 28.34, it's fastest by a mile.
And Australia was just another part of the world as far as Group A went, but as I said, mentioned previously, that the competition out here was far more stiffer than what it was anywhere else, because the Dick Johnson Racing, I mean, their Sierras were the best Sierras in the world. And even though Eggenberger in Europe had a lot of success for their cars, the fastest cars of the lot were Dick's cars. And that's what pushed the Gibson Motorsport team into making the GT-Rs a far, far better car in all avenues. It was a very competitive era, it really was. And the other thing too, the worst part about it was that that era as well too, you had Ford and Holden, right? And that was installed in 99% of the supporters of touring car racing. Right? Along comes Nissan. Well, they were really the oddball in there, and there was more hate than love for the Nissans back in the era. And that since has turned around, because the cars have now, the GT-R in particular, has created this iconic sphere, and now everybody loves them, whereas back in the day 99% of people hated them because they were disturbing the Ford and Holden, thinking they were beating them. That was the biggest issue. Yeah. I was working and had an agreement with Nissan NISMO to one of their programs in Europe. We were running the what they call the prototype Group C program, which is it was a World Series where we run the sports cars that were built specially for racing, and that program finished, and then Nissan decided that they would like me to come back to Australia and take over the Gibson operation to try and sort of help with some technology that we developed in Europe to put into these cars to be able to advance their development quicker than what they were being developed, so that we could get results. And the results were, the brief was to win Bathurst as the first Japanese manufacturer that did so. And that's what we did. Well, as team manager of Gibson Motorsport, I oversaw the development a little bit of Chassis 1 towards the end of its life before it met its demise in Adelaide Grand Prix. And then Chassis 2 was very much a car that we used for the development of the chassis and the engine and all that sort of stuff for a short period of time over the end of 1990, early 91. And then Chassis 3 was built during that period to race in 91 as well. And then we built Chassis 4, which is the GIO car, which we built for Bob Forbes, a customer. And then Chassis 5 was the last of the cars that were built, and that was Jim Richards' car, the car that we call the Pack of Arseholes, based on the results that turned up at Bathurst in 1992 after Dick supposedly won it, but it went back a lap and Jim was in front when that happened. So Jim paid out to the crowd when they booed him about his result. I thought it was very good, actually. He was quite specific in what he thought.
This is bloody disgraceful. I'll keep racing, but I'll tell you what, this is going to remain with me for a long time. You're a pack of arseholes.
The Gibson Motorsport team was an exceptional group of people at the time. The innovation ability they had, the whole process, everybody in the place, and there was 40 odd people in the team at that stage, which was a big team for that time or that era. But everybody had one purpose, and that was to try and make a better car, but to win races. And the competition in this part of the world at that time was extreme. I mean, the best series in the world were here, and so that was something that motivated the whole team to move ahead. And then we had some people like Bob Forbes, who was a privateer, and he was prepared to invest in getting the best cars that were out there, and he bought had us build the GAO car from scratch, and I actually supervised the build of that car from woe to go. Yeah, and it's turned out it's as good a car as any of the works cars that we had. It's the same as, and I mean, to have somebody like Bob that invested into that sort of thing was just a fantastic thing at the time. Out of all the teams that I've run both in Europe and here, it was by far the most innovative group of people I've ever worked with, which was, I mean, it was just a joy. I mean, there's some of the stuff that they made, and the GAO car, if you get the opportunity to look at the thing, or people can see the thing closely, everything is made in-house, and it's made from a guy that on the drawing board that drew a few things up to people that actually put a chalk mark on the floor and measured something up and made it from there. I mean, it's just incredible what these blokes could do. And the development of the engines. I mean, the engines were something that, look, they built up from nothing into a car that could run a comfortable 650, 680 horsepower all day. Well, the response from people about the Nissan was, in some cases, quite dramatic. I mean, Larry Perkins, for example, he campaigned extensively to try and get the front axles taken out of the car so it was back to two-wheel drive, because he hated the thing and was very vocal about the whole thing. But eventually he didn't get his way, and we were able to maintain the car in its current state. The biggest difference between the three makes at the time, between Ford, Holden and the Nissan, was the fact that the Nissan ran a bigger tyre, bigger wheel, had more power, and again, it did have some traction advantages with the four-wheel drive in different cases. Whereas the Commodore was limited with its power. It had a reasonable tyre on it, but it still was limited with its power, and it couldn't match the performance of the GT-R. And the Sierra, though it had similar power outputs, but it couldn't sustain the outputs because the engines were very temperamental, but it had a very small tyre on the back. So the tyre would burn out in a short amount of time, whereas the Commodore would probably outlast in a long distance race because it had a better tyre, bigger tyre. The R32, it had a big wheel, big tyre, and it had four of them that were working. And that just sort of made the longevity of the lap times longer and greater than what the Sierra could maintain. In the early days, we had a close connection with NISMO Japan, with using a lot of their components that they built their car, but as we developed our own stuff and moved into chassis 2, 3, 4 and 5, then it became less and less and less. I mean, minor components like water pumps and different bits and pieces like that we bought through NISMO, but that was as far as it went. During my period with the prototype cars, we'd set up a data acquisition system called PI Research, which was a combination of a gentleman called Eric Broadley that owned Lola Cars and a couple of professors from Cambridge University. And we started off with this little data logging thing which had a 9-volt battery in it. It was about the size of about 3 cigarette packets, and that gives us a little bit of information out of the car about what revs it was doing and all this sort of thing. And these professors developed this thing into quite a sophisticated and competent data acquisition system, whereas I think we had something like about 40 channels in this thing, and I brought them out with me, which we fitted into chassis 2, and we were able to data log, I mean, turbo speeds, engine temperatures, revs, brake temperatures. I mean, so much stuff that we could see. If we put a brake cooling system in the thing, we could see how efficient it was. We could check to see what the turbos were doing and all that sort of stuff, because one of the issues we had was at Bathurst, the atmospheric pressure change from pit lane to the top is quite significant. And if anybody that ever followed Group A and Dick Johnson back in those days always saw Dick blow a turbocharger up at Bathurst. Well, the problem was that the turbochargers produced so much boost at the pit lane, but when they got to the top of the hill, then basically the atmospheric pressure was so less that the turbocharger was spinning so much faster to try and achieve the same boost that it would overspin and blow up. And we were able to monitor that RPM change in the turbocharger and then control it as such so that when it got to the top of the hill, that it was still running within its rev range so that it didn't blow up. The Gibson Motorsport team had some very good electronic guys, engineers that worked within the team itself, and the actual engine management system was put together by a company in America called Automotive, and it was, I mean, well advanced, even to today's standards. I mean, it had abilities that, like I said, you struggle to find in some of the latest and greatest engine management control systems. And one of the things that it had was the ability to be able to tune each individual cylinder. And in times when there were sort of constraints put on the car with boost limiters and other bits and pieces, then the engineering guys got together with the engine guys, and we had a boost limiter put on the car that took it from about 650 horsepower back to about 570, which was a big step back for a car of that weight and that size. So the engineering people and the engine people got together, and they got an engine, and they individually tuned that engine, each cylinder, from I think about 1100 RPM, and every 250 RPM increment they tuned it to 8,500, because that's where we used to run them, to 8,500, and then each cylinder they got the efficiency so much better that it brought the engine back up to about 650 horsepower. And it was that sort of thing that the electromotive system and the technology and the thing that was in that let us do that, to be able to get the car back up to a performing car. In addition to that, the guys again, they got into the control unit that controls the four-wheel drive system in the car, and they were able to adapt to it a little box that went from 0 to 3. Which was the drivers, as the rear tyres started to go off in their ability to grip, then they could turn the knob and give more to the front, so that it would sort of take a bit of weight off the tyres at the rear, but also give it more grip at the front. One of the other things that we had a problem with the car was the fact that when it left the pits and drove around to park up on the grid, that was sort of a lap of the track that was at moderate speed, and then the second lap they had to drive around again to park on the grid, and then they'd start the race. Well, in that duration of those 2 laps, there'd be enough heat in the tyres to cause the car to sort of bog down when they try to do a standing start with the thing. So the engineers and the electronic blokes were innovative enough that they made a pause in the four-wheel drive, so that I think it was up to 50 kilometres an hour there was no four-wheel drive, it was only rear-wheel drive, and then once the wheels started to spin and break traction and the car was moving, then it would bring the four-wheel drive in and the car would just disappear down the road. Before the boost valve was included in the package, we did have the ability to turn the boost up higher, and the GIO car of recent times with recent fuels and all the good stuff that it's got in it, and its technical spec in the engine is identical to 1990 era. That car will turn out almost 800 horsepower. So it's got the ability, it's at 1.6 bar boost, so it's got the ability to be right up there amongst the best of them. And that's not bad for a 30-odd-year-old car. The engine block improvement came through the fact that we couldn't get an engine off the dyno that was split. They've got a water port and an oil delivery port to the turbochargers. So the turbochargers were water cooled, and between those two ports it would crack the block. And it was just the sheer fact that the torque of the engine was twisting the block. And like I said, couldn't get off the dyno, and there was water on the floor. And we went through numerous blocks, and it was a discussion that was being had with Japan. A few of us flew to Japan for a couple of reasons, and one of them was to discuss the cylinder block. And the cylinder block, they promptly modified it in its design and casting and all that sort of thing, so that it was a stronger block. And then they did 5 blocks for us, I believe it was, and sent them over so that we could have some good reliable engines for Bathurst in particular. And then that block, I believe, went into production. Now, the rumour I'm told is that turned into the N1 block, but I can't tell you if that's a fact or not. All I know is that the block that was made for us went into production, so that became the block that people used in an RB26. The regional brake package it ran, we'd have to do a pad stop every 34 or so laps. And during 1990, the Japanese run an R32 in the Spa 24-hour race, and they made, or had Elcon, a brake company, make special calipers for them and pads. And I was able to acquire a couple of sets of those, which we fitted onto the cars in 91, and they were very special. They were, instead of normal brake pads, about 25mm, then you can get a 30mm thick pad, but these ones were 35mm pad. And they were a special pad made by a company called Performance Friction in America, and $800 a pad. So we needed a couple of sets per car, and we had a set of calipers, these calipers on each car. And that gave us the ability to be able to run the car to lap 97 and then do a brake pad change. And that's what sort of threw the competition into chaos, because people were thinking, oh, yeah, every 35 laps they're going to have to come in, or 34, and do pads, and then you probably have to do rotors up the road and that sort of thing. But we got the pad thickness was such, and the airflow that we were able to get into the brakes and keep them cool was such that lap 97 we sort of put a set of pads in. And I think from memory we probably could have even gone the whole race, but we put a set of pads in anyway to make sure we got to the finish okay. They had an engineer from Garrett, Los Angeles, come across, and we had a meeting with them because we wanted to discuss our turbochargers with them, because we had our own in-house turbocharged tester, and we'd done a lot of machining operations to thrust faces and bearings and all that sort of stuff that the engineer guys had done and the machine shop guys had done. And we wanted to sort of show Garrett what we were doing, and really probably to find out if we were going up the wrong thing like that. Well, and I quote this, that we were sitting around the table and we had a turbocharger of ours that we showed the Garrett guy, and he just looked at us and said, God damn, he said, you guys are 5 years in front of us. The GT-R is special in the fact that it was so dominant in its time. It was unique in its time. I mean, it had those characters around it that basically made it something special. But I must say that in its time, at that time, it wasn't considered that. The Legion grew as the year went by. I mean, the GODZILLA name that the car got, I mean, it was a local journo that sort of picked up the name, put it on it, and it's now a global word used to describe the car. I believe Fred and a gentleman called Bob Forbes had a discussion, and Bob was a racer, had Commodores and things like that, raced himself, that owned an Xteranas and other different bits and pieces, and he wanted to get something that was sort of front running, and did a deal with Fred for us to build, the team to build a car identical to the the factory cars that we had, as we call them, factory cars. So that was what was done. So colour was picked out, and then we sort of then started to prep the body shells and all that sort of thing, the roll cage, and started to build it into the car. And then when the car was complete, we come up to Amaroo Park and did a test with Bob, so that he could see that the car was equally as good as our cars. We had one of our cars there as well with it, and Mark Skaife drove both to sort of see, and his car was actually marginally faster than what our cars were. I mean, to the point where you couldn't fudge it. No driver could fudge the difference. It was quite a small margin, but it was still a margin faster. And I believe that there was a deal done that if our cars were faster than his car, then there was a reduction in the purchase price that Fred had agreed to with Bob. Now, exactly the number I wouldn't repeat, but it was significant. But anyway, the car was as good as ours, and they were identical cars. We built the thing exactly the same as what our factory cars were at the time. Yeah, well, the 1991 Sandown 500, we were probably, I mean, you've got I'm not a real believer in luck, but it's fate and all sorts of things, but in that particular event, we had to do a pad change in the car, and we did that, and they ran into a few problems because they're all new guys on the block, sort of thing. It was a new car for them, and new things they had to do. Anyway, we did a pad change, and it was quite a long pad change. And at that stage, Glenn Seaton was winning the race quite considerably at that stage, and we were second, I think, from my memory. And then we went on and finished, and I think we finished a number of laps in front of the next competitor. So it was a good win. Really, really good win, yeah.
The Drink Drive 500 at Sandown, the 26th enduro race here, completed successfully by Rowan Onslow on behalf of team owner and manager Bob Forbes and Mark Gibbs, the lead driver in the car. And indeed, it's victory, another Nissan victory at Sandown, because it's been fairly happy hunting ground here for the Nissans.
But the current GIO car and its current spec, in my book, would be just as quick as a Gen 3, maybe even a Gen 2 V8, as our current category's got, around any of the circuits with the right driver in it. No problem at all. Yeah. I'm quite proud of that fact, that that time I was able to sort of steer the ship to some degree and have an input into the cars to some degree from the engineering point of view and all that type of thing. So that's the exceptional bit of the whole thing. And again, still being involved with them. I mean, how good's that?